Before this video gets started, guys, I would like to mention that I recently sat down on the Explicit Materia podcast with Wise Drums for a discussion about this series of videos, and I just had an awesome time talking to him. He's a really nice guy, and for those who are interested in getting more of an idea and an inside look as to how these videos are made and just enjoy listening to these videos, I highly recommend checking it out.
Everyone dies eventually.
I suppose.
So we need to make the most of the time we have. To live our lives the way we want to live. Every minute, every moment matters.
I'll remember that.
This is not a spoiler-free discussion. In fact, it is the exact opposite. What I am going to be discussing here is a continuation of these series of videos, which continues a complete deconstruction of the entire compilation as it pertains to Remake. I have gone through the compilation once again in order to find more interesting details, as well as diving into the Japanese releases of each of them. On top of this, I have been digging deeper into these games in ways that I just never imagined doing at the beginning of this series. That research, along with the previous information that I have gathered, has only continued to show me the value that the compilation has to its contributions to Remake. There is one thing that I would like to say before starting. Before we get right into it, I just want to be clear that these videos, as I continue to research, will be doing their best to make light of new findings in my research. This new information may replace some prior theories as these parts progress. I do my best not to contradict my theories, as I still find them to be important in ways, but if something fits better, I am more than happy to replace it and share that information with you all. That being said, I will be doing my best to give context for both new and old ideas and how they better fit my perspective of the complete story of Remake. That being said, here we go, the theory.
We are monsters. You are no exception.
During the time when the ancients prospered, there existed beings that were brought up, bathed in the light of abundant Mako. They were pure creatures of natural shape. Several types remain even now. Some of these beings sealed their life energy within materia, altering their lives forever. The summoning materia. Correct. Such a clever girl. What if I told you that the Cetra, a civilization guided by the will of the planet, served the function of bringing about life on the planet, but also its destruction and its rebirth, and that this ritual extended far beyond the time that we know to end life for the sole purpose of maintaining both the balance of good and evil? And that by wiping the slate clean each cycle, this made sure that not any one power could ever become powerful enough to harm the planet itself, and that by maintaining the balance of good and evil, the planet could continue its constant cycle of life on the planet, and that each cycle, the materia given to the Cetra were passed on in order to incite these events, and that at some point the balance of good and evil shifted, and this was caused by the Cetra's ideologies shifting. This shift between the Cetra created a power struggle, and both groups having control over the tools at their disposal and being able to use the power of the planet began a conflict for control, one wanting to stay true to the will of the planet, and the other no longer willing to continue to do so. And that upon this shifting, the planet gifted the Cetra with a materia. Unlike any other materia, this one brought about the power to destroy the entire planet, one that would lead to the events of starting life anew on a different planet. A group of Cetra, the ones that were loyal to the planet, would listen, but there were those who did not. Another group of Cetra began to question the will of the planet, and decided that rather than accept the planet's will, they chose to defy it. Aided by the help of humans, those who would be destroyed if the planet's will were to be completed, would oppose the planet's will. And that 2,000 years ago, upon the activation of the black materia, a materia given to the Cetra by the planet as a last resort in order to bring about the final cycle of this planet, sought to forcefully end this opposing ideology. And that another group of Cetra, defying the planet's will, chose to fight against them. And instead of allowing for the lifestream of the planet to activate Omega, the weapon that would allow them to leave the planet, these Cetra decided to face the calamity, not for the sake of the planet, but for the sake of all existing life on the planet. And by choosing to challenge this destiny, brought about a meteor that fell from the sky. Without the activation of Holy, an act that would have reset the cycle of the planet, the meteor struck the planet, and from this calamity, the planet became scarred. And that day forward, all souls in the lifestream and the planet itself was put into jeopardy, and that the cycle of balance, no longer able to be dictated by the Cetra, having been nearly brought to the point of extinction, the powers that were meant to destroy the planet would slowly become uncontrollable with this cycle. Although it brings death to those on the planet, it is put into place in order to help keep life preserved on the planet, and that without this cycle, what inevitably is to befall the planet is the end of rebirth, and that this would only bring about the death of all of the souls that were held within the lifestream of the planet, and that the point of ending it was to find a different answer, their own answer. But as the Cetra died out defending this belief, humans began to literally burn the planet's life force, and the planet, already stuck trying to heal the damage that meteor had caused, would become more and more helpless to protect this cycle, and that the hope for this answer began to die along with the planet. What Final Fantasy VII has always been a story of a cycle, but a cycle that is on the verge of becoming completely undone. And that what has been happening since the cycle became in danger is the planet trying to course correct itself, to regain control of the forces of good and evil, and heal itself. And every step of the way, you, the player, have been preventing this from happening, and that all that has been done has led to a further imbalance to everything the planet has been trying to do. And what if I told you that every single confrontation depicts a continued battle between those of these two different ideologies, and that Aerith's actions in Remake are mirroring the same hesitation, the same opposition that the planet attempted to incite the destruction of? What if I told you that Soldier, a Shinra-made army, were a concept before the creation of Shinra, and that the concept of Soldier actually was born from the Cetra? What if I told you that some of these ancient soldiers, being infused with the power of Mako energy, inevitably became what we know as summons, and that these summons became tools for the Cetra to bring about the protection of the planet's cycle and the planet's demise, manifested by the knowledge of the Cetra? What if I told you that before Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, and Final Fantasy VII were all events that were supposed to renew the cycle and bring about the world's end? The same events and the same reason for all of those events taking place? What if I told you that the events of the compilation show us a clearer, more direct cycle of events, and what Remake has done is create this recreation of this cycle for the only game in which it does not take place? And that Minerva, by her appearance alone, depicts the ideology of a certain group of Cetra, one that is loyal to the planet's will, regardless of the destruction that that ideology brings, and that she has a deeper hand in multiple events across the compilation than we previously thought, and that Genesis, being born again by the Lifestream's will, has become the weapon of the planet, and that he was guided to become this by Minerva from the very beginning, and that what Genesis's awakening signifies is a far greater threat to the planet than we are aware of. And though the Cetra's will was strong enough to attempt to defy fate, just as Aerith and her party do in Remake, what befell the planet was a much greater threat because of their beliefs. A being that has an even stronger will than the planet and the Cetra itself, and with a strong enough will to overtake the Lifestream cycle, and with it, the entire universe. One of the things that we're going to be going over are things that I have learned to be concrete information about the compilation, its stories, and some of the pieces of the universe of Final Fantasy VII and how they function. That being said, we're going to start with some pretty heavy information right off the bat.
Embrace your dreams. And whatever happens, protect your honor.
Summons and Soldier. I stated in part 3 that I didn't have a lot to say about the summons. That view has drastically shifted. I, like many others, may have always thought that before Remake, the summons and their backstory were only introduced to us through Shiva's depiction in Remake. This is not really the case. In Final Fantasy VII, there is a dialogue that was not featured in the game, and although you might think that this discredits the idea of its lack of inclusion in the final release of the game, we see in this video that the concept has been developing in the background of the compilation for quite some time, but is stated pretty clearly in this missing dialogue. In the Temple of the Ancients, upon defeating the Red Dragon, the Bahamut materia is acquired. The dropping of this materia triggers this unused dialogue from Sephiroth. During the time when the Ancients prospered, there existed beings that were brought up bathed in the light of abundant Mako. They were pure beings of natural shape. This depiction should be very familiar to you all, as it is the same process that Shinra, a modern-day company, used to create its most powerful army, soldiers. The immediate difference here are two things: is the time period in which the summons creation is taking place, summons being created a very long time ago, and pure beings of natural shape infers that most likely these beings were created before Jenova began to spread any sort of influence on the planet, meaning that while there is always a likelihood of summons being infected by Jenova, this is highlighting those who are not. And as we will come to understand, that means before the events of 2,000 years ago. This means that the type of ancient soldiers are not exactly equated to modern day soldiers as we know them, because from what we know of modern day soldiers are both infused with Mako and given small amounts of Jenova cells. This, however, does demonstrate to us that the entire concept of soldier could have come about during the study of the ancients prior to Jenova's discovery from Shinra. Now, this process of bathing in Mako also draws another similarity, as this is also how monsters in the universe of Final Fantasy VII are made. Normal members of Soldier are humans that have been showered with Mako. You're different from the others, but still human. But what are they? They've been exposed to a high degree of Mako, far more than you. Is this some kind of monster? Exactly. And it's Hojo of Shinra that produced these monsters, mutated living organisms produced by Mako energy. That's what these monsters really are. Being exposed to too much Mako, whether that is through natural pools of Mako, like the ancient times, or Shinra's experimentation with Mako, this can begin to transform normal creatures and human beings. This transformation is what creates the definition of monsters in Final Fantasy VII. But what is interesting is that summons are simply these soldier-type beings, or Mako-induced creatures, monsters who had their life energy placed inside of materia. This is further noted by Sephiroth in the unused dialogue. Some of these beings sealed their life energy within materia, altering their lives forever. As for these Cetra created summons, it isn't stated whether this is done willingly or not, and that is up for debate. But I'm going to say that most likely a combination of the two. Taking a note from Soldier in Final Fantasy VII's Ultimania, soldiers are both willingly and unwillingly given this Mako. And from what we know of similarities between the actions of Shinra and the Cetra already, I don't find this too hard to believe. We do know, however, that Sephiroth points out a process similar to this creation of summons that Cetra used is being used in the Nibelheim reactor as well. Sephiroth. This is a system that condenses and freezes the Mako energy. That is, when it's working correctly. Now, what does Mako energy become when it's further condensed? Oh yeah, it becomes materia. Right, normally, but Hojo puts something else in there. Take a look. Sephiroth shows Zack that instead of materia being condensed, it is Mako along with a human being who has been exposed to far more Mako than normal monsters. The same process that we understand that creates materia was being used to try and condense human beings into Mako. Hojo is seen trying to recreate the process in which summons are made. This is important to note because from what we know of Machanoids, the creatures inside of this pod that we're seeing, the only thing transforming them is a large amount of Mako, not Genova cells, not any other cells, just Mako. Keep in mind that this creates another parallel between what Shinra is doing and what Cetra have already done, and that Hojo is trying to replicate the same conditions that the Cetra used in order to make what we know as summons. Sephiroth in the Temple of the Ancients in Final Fantasy VII, in the unused dialogue, mentions that these summons have several types and remain even now in modern day. Keep this in mind moving forward because we're going to elaborate on this. This brings up another important thing that we need to know moving forward. Materia. I can literally write an entire 3-hour-long episode based on just the subject of materia, but I'm gonna try my best to just do my best to keep it short and informative. We haven't talked in any of these videos about how materia works, and in order to understand exactly how summons operate in the Final Fantasy VII universe, and how they play a much bigger part in every single Final Fantasy VII and its compilation, including the original, we need to understand materia in a lot of detail. This conversation can get very heavy, very fast, so I'm going to try my best to just explain it step by step exactly how this all works. So, materia is explained in Final Fantasy VII as this. Materia, when you condense Mako energy, materia is produced. The knowledge and wisdom of the ancients is held in the materia. Anyone with this knowledge can freely use the powers of the land and the planet. This means by that condensing this spiritual energy, as Mako is also referred to, you can create materia. Using materia is activating the knowledge that the Cetra have placed inside of it, thus giving those who use it a direct connection to the power of the planet. The knowledge of the Cetra bridges the gap from the user to the power of the planet. Note that this exchange between the body and the planet is important to know because from what we know of Advent Children, the bodies of all living beings have a life stream-like current inside of them. This inner life stream inside of all living things most likely is what allows the person using the materia to access a conversation that allows the use of materia. That being said, this means that any function that we see portrayed in a materia, any power we see in the summon materias, or any power that is even being used by summons, is a direct connection to the power of the life stream. All of this power belongs to the planet, but the way of accessing that power is through the knowledge of the Cetra. This means, regardless of you being a summon or not, what is held inside of every materia is the knowledge of the Cetra, and no matter what, there isn't materia without this knowledge. That also applies to both materia that is good and materia that is evil. Materia has been presented to us in several different ways. It is shown to us being naturally created by the planet. We see this in the small tree in Mount Nebel. We see this in Crisis Core in Benora Underground with the large red materia. We see this in Final Fantasy VII with the Knights of the Round materia. And we see this in another area in Final Fantasy VII in the Northern Crater at the end of the game. But we're not going to go into that one just yet. It can also be created by the Cetra, as demonstrated in the VR cutscene in Remake. And we can see them being created by Shinra in Crisis Core as well. One other version of materia is huge materia. This is super important to understanding every event in the compilation. Huge materia are extremely condensed materia. These materia are known to be 330 times the power of a regular materia. These huge materia are actually grown in reactors throughout Final Fantasy VII. This isn't any good either. You only get junky materia from junky reactors. This reactor's a failure. What I'm looking for is big, large, huge materia. You seen any? So what we know from that is that certain reactors create certain huge materia, and depending on the quality of the reactor, i.e. the amount of Mako that is in the area for the reactor to harvest, means the quality of the huge materia. That being said, Shinra tries to use them as bullets to destroy Meteor in the original, but this isn't the only way that they are used in Final Fantasy VII. What huge materia is known to be used for is fusing powerful materia together. We see this in the OG Final Fantasy VII. The colors of these large materia are as follows: blue, yellow, green, and red. All of these materias enhance your powerful materia in the game, and when joined together create master materia. There's a lot of fun that we can have by looking at each of these huge materias and what they make by combining them with your existing materia, but we're gonna go into that in a different video. Just know that because of their size, these materias do hold an exceptional amount of energy, and that we will see this demonstrated later, but keep the idea of huge materia in mind as it is important. Now, at this point, we need to make this clear, is that we do see huge materia in the Benora Underground being naturally created. We need to keep this in mind because what it tells us is that both Cetra and Shinra are creating the same tools in different ways. While the Cetra created these things more successfully, and actually as we will see later, the Cetra's materia is so much more powerful, Shinra has literally done the same thing. From soldier to materia, from reactors, from huge materia, and as we'll come to find out, another similarity that they share is that they both have used Genova in some capacity. Everything that Shinra has done, Cetra have already done, but not everything. Speaking of Genova, the proto-materia. We are going to be talking a lot about this materia because its existence shows us a lot. The proto-materia, we see that regardless of the entities that are being presented, whether they are born from light or dark, we know that this materia is able to control both the life stream and Genova. And as we have discussed in prior videos, it holds a very key part in maintaining the balance of the life stream. The importance of this materia does signify something very strange though, is when it was made. Unlike Holy or Meteor, we do have a date for when the proto-materia was created. It was created several millennia ago, meaning that at that time, for some reason, the life stream created this materia 2,000 years ago. This is the one thing that the Cetra possessed that Shinra does not. This control over Genova. We're going to be talking more about this when we get to Dirge of Cerberus. Now let's recap briefly before we move on. We learned that summons are Cetras, humans, creatures that are endowed with the powers of Mako-like soldiers, and that using the knowledge of the planet, these beings condense their life energy into the form of a materia, and that by doing so, were granted a far longer lifespan. But by placing their life in the materia, the person gives up their own will to the planet. They became tools for those who wielded them. We learned that materia is condensed Mako, and that each materia, regardless of what it is, holds within it the knowledge of the Cetra, meaning that it's their knowledge of this energy that allows for those who use it to activate the planet's magic. We learned what huge materia is, large condensed Mako, and that its power is special. Not only because it's significantly more powerful than regular materia, but because it can fuse with other materia. This is all going to come into play later, but now let's put this all into context of Final Fantasy VII and its compilation. We're going to do that by looking at Remake. Mother came to this planet after a long journey to rid the cosmos of fools like you. But you know as well as me, nothing has changed since Mother came here. I have to change it to make her happy. As long as you exist, the nightmares will come again and again. If that cycle is the very truth of life, the life stream, then history too will inevitably repeat itself. The painting. This painting has a lot of information in it. I do believe that this one picture solidifies my point that this video will be making. In my opinion, this painting depicts two different factions of Cetra, coming together to create the cycle that we have come to understand throughout this video series, but introduces it in a way that will become much clearer as this video goes on. In this painting, we see several things, but our focus will be specifically on one aspect, the Cetra and the cycle. First off, we see that the Cetra are using books in order to activate summons, but that's not the whole story. There are actually 3 different types of Cetra being depicted here. The first group of Cetra, the first 2 on the right, are depicted as wearing gold in white clothing. Now, for those who aren't familiar, gold, or the color yellow, is the color that depicts several Cetra, but the yellow is the main association for their usual depiction of them. You see this golden theme, or this yellow theme, in several different places. You see it in the VR cutscene with the Cetra lining their sleeves. You see it on Alphana's clothing in Remake, which you wouldn't be able to see because of her cutscene is in black and white, but looking at her actual model and the concept art of this character, Alphana's necklace and her clothing depicts this color and the pattern that is similar to the other Cetra in the VR cutscene, and you also see this same pattern, this same color in Minerva's armor. These golden Cetra depicted in the painting are using their power to manifest the summons through the materia, through the books, whereas the summons, the creatures, are depicted being the color of the life stream, green. These creatures were manifested in what seems to be a pure way because of this color association. Now the second group of Cetra, the other group of Cetra are depicted in white robes just like the other, but not the gold color that we have usually seen them depicted in. Their embroideries, their jewelry, whatever it is depicted differently. They are mainly gray. They are Cetra, but they too are summoning something, but not the summons that the other group is using. If you follow the trail of their strand of Mako energy, the life stream, it leads to a lot of things, but what we're going to address are 2 of them for now. The first thing we see is the Phoenix. We know that this is the Phoenix because of the tails it is made up of are an odd strand of color. We're going to talk about these strands later. Phoenixes are known for their association with rebirth, but The interesting thing is what comes from behind the phoenix, a head of a monster. This creature is challenging the summons. This head of a creature that is fighting the summons is not depicted as the other summons in the picture. This monster is specifically depicted in black. As we know, this color refers to what we know as something evil. So what is going on here? This all depicts a cycle of good and evil coming together and having this confrontation. As we have discussed throughout this video series, we know that this has already been happening, and that is nothing new, but in Remake, through this painting, is showing us this cycle in an odd way, rather than being a confrontation of seemingly two opposite entities. The Cetra, based off of this one image alone, are depicted being involved in both sides of the confrontation that we have seen over time. The Cetra are representing the good, but also the evil. But why are the Cetra being depicted as being the catalyst for both sides? Many times I have asked myself, how and why does this cycle between good and evil exist? What is the purpose of this? Well, we have actually seen Cetra use this evil power before in the original Final Fantasy VII. In the Temple of the Ancients, a mural is depicted on the wall. At first glance, this event seems to have just simply explained what happens when Meteor is activated, but that isn't the entire story. This mural depicts the use of Meteor, the use of the black materia, but that, unlike the event that takes place with Cloud's party and Sephiroth, Holy is not depicted in this mural. What we do see, however, is that this mural is showing us an event of the world's destruction, and that the black materia was actually activated by the Cetra themselves at a different time during the history of Final Fantasy VII. And note that this depiction of the Cetra is unlike any of the depictions of Cetra before it. This could very easily be signaling to us that the events going on in this mural are that of a different cycle, a different group of Cetra that we only see in this mural. So, what is going on here? The reason the Cetra used the black materia is the same reason why we see Cetra depicted in both the balance of good and evil in Aerith's mural. It is because the destruction of life, as we have come to know it, maintains the balance of the planet. And it was the Cetra's job as the stewards of the planet that they maintain the death and rebirth of the planet. So when things on the planet became too detrimental to its own preservation, the use of a catalyst, like the black materia, was to bring about the world's end. In this instance, in this mural in Final Fantasy VII, the black materia was used. But again, from what we know, this is not the entire story. The Cetra, the white materia, and the black materia. Now this is where things need to get clarified. The white materia, used as a last resort to protect the planet, the ultimate white magic, has zero information as to when it is created or how it was created. All we know of Holy, and in turn the white materia, is that the knowledge of it was passed down from each generation of Cetra. Now that's interesting to me because of what we have talked about before. These generations of Cetra we may not have ever seen depicted clearly, but rather that each cycle passes on information of tools of both this white magic and this destructive magic. And from what we know about Holy is that even though it doesn't completely destroy the planet, it will destroy anything that the planet deems as bad. Keep in mind, both of these things usually destroy the planet or end life on it, and that the function of Holy doesn't specify itself as the means of protecting the planet, and that it is just the last resort that our characters have to stopping Meteor. Rather, it is the only thing that can be used to counter it. How would the Cetra pass on their knowledge? How is that possible? Well, there are a number of ways in which that could be. The spiritual body. First of all, the spiritual body is the body of the soul, the soul, the we see that the Cetra can maintain a spiritual body, as well as communicate to people with a body or without one. As an example of this, I am of the belief that this parallels a lot of what we see in the Temple of the Ancients. In the Temple of the Ancients, we actually meet other Cetra, and Aerith is able to speak to them without talking. Those are the spirit bodies of the Ancients. They've been away from the planet for a long time to protect this temple. Over the many years, they've lost the ability to talk. Actually, they didn't need words from the beginning. These spiritual bodies are very reminiscent of what we see depicted in On the Way to a Smile. Cetra do exist inside the life stream, but most of them have lost all real knowledge of their prior selves. I imagine, similarly to the Cetra we see depicted in the Temple of the Ancients, the reason that they have all lost parts of themselves is not only because they no longer need to have them, but is because they begin to exist only to serve the function of the planet. Similar to how I have categorized the Whispers in Remake, Aerith rallies these remaining Cetra to cure Geostigma from the lifestream in On the Way to a Smile. This mirrors the function of the Ancients in the temple, being that they exist only to protect the black materia. Another thing to note is that in On the Way to a Smile, Aerith recognizes that she too could physically manifest herself on the physical plane similarly to Sephiroth, as this exact same power of will creates the remnants of Kadaj and the boys. I believe that this ability is being demonstrated in these remaining Cetra in the Temple of the Ancients. I think that this same exercise of willing oneself to the physical plane is demonstrated once again in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Sephiroth, with the bird in the opening being cued in the same way as the purple color reveal in the alleyway in Remake, but also through Aerith in the first trailer that we ever got for the game. Instead of this trailer representing the bird that we see in the final game, this bird is white, which again is associated with the light, which Aerith represents. This could very well be indicating what people have been thinking all along, that both Sephiroth and Aerith are returning to this time period, which does leave a lot to be answered as far as what other Cetra could do, but we're going to elaborate on this in a future video. The reason she chooses not to do this is because she would not appear as herself rather than a different form. That being said, the form that we are seeing the Cetra take in their spiritual bodies in the temple most likely is not their original form, but a separate one. Another thing worth noting is that the way that these Cetra do communicate to Aerith is by the pool inside of the Temple of the Ancients. This pool is also reminiscent of the others that we have talked about in previous videos, such as the water altar. Whether Cetra take on a physical form or not, we know that they have many ways of communicating to other Cetra, or those they choose to speak with, i.e. Bugenhagen to the Cetra in the Forgotten Capital, and Minerva does the same thing with Genesis. It's important to note that while the Cetra can be seen as their own beings, or their own separate race with a different background, this is not necessarily the case. Ancients do have a closer connection to the planet than others, but this connection can be learned or genetically inherited. And like I have stated before, people like Aerith, a Cetra, kind of have this link to the planet whether they want to or not. This is demonstrated in the short story we talked about in the last video, and Aerith's possession in it, what leads to her to create the mural in Remake, and that these images haunt her rather than are willingly coming to her. Now, another way of preserving themselves that I would like to bring up is the water altar. As I've stated before, this area in which the water altar is located holds a large similarity to the tree of Yggdrasil, which in the events of Norse mythology during Ragnarok, those who wanted to survive could go deep within the tree of Yggdrasil in order to protect themselves. The water altar displays this quality very simply by comparing the land above where it resides. The land above the water altar is desolate of life, a primitive place, whereas the water altar depicts a much more advanced civilization. This is important because the water altar is also the main tool to activate Holy, meaning that this area, because of its placement, could very easily allow for one to cast Holy and to stay protected from Holy's effects. This would support not only the concept of Cetra preserving their knowledge, but also support how the Cetra could survive into different cycles. Areas like these could also hold Cetra texts, proverbs, and tablets. Another way that Cetra have demonstrated their passing down of knowledge is Cetra texts. In Dirge, it is the Cetra tablet. In Crisis Core, it is Loveless. In Final Fantasy VII, it's the Mural and the Temple of the Ancients. And a hidden one to us in Before Crisis, which leads to Fajito, the main antagonist who studied the planet to learn about Zirconiade through his study of the planet. These are all examples of remnants of the Cetra and that we have been exposed to throughout the compilation. However, in Remake, we have several. In Remake, it is the proverb, it is the mural that Aerith makes, but another one seems to be the books in the mural as well. These books could very easily have been the way that Cetra would pass on the knowledge of the existence of the planet's needs, but also its functions, and how to create them or use them. I am under the impression that these two books depicted in Aerith's mural possess the knowledge of the Cetra, but both the knowledge of how to create life on the planet and protect it, but also destroy it. There's one other thing that we need to note about how knowledge could be passed down from Cetra to Cetra in different generations, and that is the life stream. I don't need to talk about this in length, but the description of the life stream is stated as this: a current of the power of life, spirit energy, that circulates within the planet. An enormous swell of knowledge is woven throughout. So what this quote gives us, along with our understanding of all materia, is that the presence of knowledge is accessible to anyone who gains access to the knowledge of the life stream, and that by exposing yourself to the full force of the life stream's knowledge, you can either become overwhelmed and your mind can crack in two, or it can grant you a massive amount of knowledge if you survive this process. Now, as I've stated before, Shinra and the Cetra are being depicted as having created the same thing, one weaker than the other perhaps. My belief is that just as Shinra's science department, whether it was Gast, Hojo, or Grimoire, another scientist from Dirge of Cerberus, used their understanding of the ancients through these texts or these proverbs to find out exactly what Mako is, to create soldiers or theorize of the creations of stronger soldiers. The Cetra, with the information of prior Cetra, used these books in order to properly carry out the will of the planet. The point of this is just to illustrate that no matter what cycle, the Cetra have several different ways of communicating to future generations of the Cetra or people. Just as Aerith is being contacted by other Cetra from before her time, the same could be said that these voices of the planet would be perfectly capable of communicating to other life forms that have a connection to the planet. The information of the white materia, the black materia, and other summons, other materias, all sorts of things. Without going into too much detail, Minerva also demonstrates this quality to us. She seems to be functioning very similarly, and from the way that she is depicted, she is not similar to any other ancient that we have seen. Whether that is in the statues, the pictures, or the spiritual bodies, meaning that her particular place in time seems rather removed from any cycle we have seen depicted so far. But now we need to talk about the black materia. We have in the past had a very vague idea as to where the black materia came from, but by looking at Final Fantasy VII Ultimania, we see that the black materia is one of the magics given to the ancients, but due to it harnessing enough power to destroy the planet itself, the ancients feared it and could prove dangerous and sealed it away by their own hands. Now, there's a lot to take away from this one definition of the black materia, because rather than the black materia being made by the Cetra, it was a materia that was given to them by something. The most likely place is that this materia to summon Meteor was given to them by the planet. We can elaborate on this by looking at how the proto-materia and the weapons were made, that by the planet's will, these things were created. If this is the case, all three examples of the planet's creations show us that the planet is involved in each part of the process of the destruction of life on the planet. The black materia, a magic used to destroy all life and the planet, the weapons there to protect the planet from its own destruction or to prevent the planet's life stream into coming into harm's way, and the proto-materia, a materia meant to balance the forces that represent both of these elements, good and evil. But upon receiving the materia from the planet, the Cetra decided that it was too dangerous to keep around. Thus, the Temple of the Ancients was created. But then, upon reading a description of Sephiroth in the Ultimania, we learn this. After falling into the lifestream, Sephiroth learned of Meteor from the Cetra's first-hand knowledge of it. The first-hand knowledge implies, just as I have stated before, that the knowledge that Sephiroth acquires from the lifestream may have been the knowledge of its prior use, rather than him just learning about the existence of it. Again, if we were to think about all the time that the Cetra have been present on the planet, for as long as they have existed. So here is an important thing that we need to distinguish, is that from our understanding, materia is usually not framed to us in this light, as it is usually created by the knowledge of the Cetra. In this instance, the planet is giving it to the Cetra, which is extremely unusual. But as we will come to understand this, it actually still fits the definition of what we know materia to be. The production of this materia coming from the planet leads to some very serious implications. Weapon. I've equated weapons to summons in the past, and if they are equated to summons, then they are materia. But we need to understand that the weapons, as told to us by the original Final Fantasy VII, have a particular history that separates them from the depictions of summons. Summons are entities that are infused with Mako, giving their life energy to materia by the Cetra. And weapons, from what we know of Final Fantasy VII, are not made this way. What we do know of weapons is that sometime during the conflict between the Cetra and Jenova, the planet itself created the weapons, but they were no longer needed as Jenova was sealed away. Now, for a long time, we thought that this was just the case, that the planet just created the weapons. But from what we know of Minerva's function throughout this series of videos, this isn't as clear as Final Fantasy VII makes it out to be. And without getting into her too much in this part of the video, we know that Minerva's will is that of the life stream, and that she is linked to the Cetra through the color of her eyes, green. So then, what does that say about anything born from the planet? So if Minerva had a hand in creating the weapons, and we know of them to be born of the planet, what does that then say about anything born from the planet? Is that most likely it was born from the will of Cetra at some point, just not directly. The knowledge of Cetra is practically integrated into the lifestream itself, and this would make things a lot clearer to us, as it seems to be the base of every materia that we have ever come across, meaning that regardless of whether the planet manifested it or not, it is through the Cetra that all materia comes into being, meaning that the only difference between the materia created from the planet before the events of the Cetra, as we know 2,000 years ago, is that most likely the Cetra from years before them manifested the materia, known as materia created from the planet. Again, we can see this through Minerva's connection to the white tree in Benora's underground, meaning that through her presence, this materia, naturally created materia, was created. From what we learned so far is that both magics, regardless of how they are given to us, are related in some capacity to the Cetra. The only difference is the generation in which the materia is gifted and the generation of Cetra, and that the Cetra have many ways of consistently giving this information to future generations of itself, and that materia, like the black materia, things that will incite the destruction of the planet, were constructed similarly to other materia that are associated with the Cetra. Whereas, from what I've stated before, the balance is maintained by two different groups of Cetra. Now, as I said at the start of this video, is that I believe that one group of Cetra was set to follow the will of the planet, and in the past I have equated things that are known to be good and evil to be separate color associations, one of those colors being yellow and one of them being purple. So when looking at Minerva, what do we see depicted? On the surface of her design, we see clearly the patterns on her armor. The color of her armor is associated with many different things that are associated with the Cetra, but one thing that stands out above everything else, on her tiara there are three things, two of which are not depicted on any other part of her armor. The strand of yellow making up part of her tiara, and the other strand is purple, both of which lead up to a blue gem that looks like an eye because of the dot in the center. This tiara, this representation of two colors that we have already seen associated with all sorts of things through the compilation. We've seen it associated with Shinra, we've seen it associated with Sephiroth, we've seen it associated with Minerva with the yellow, with Aerith. This represents two colors that already have an association with one another as representing two sides, are found on the same headdress as a Cetra. Minerva, with just her design, shows us that this concept of Cetra's involvement with these two sides has always been the case. So, if the will of the planet created the black materia, then it is the will of the planet that its power exists for its use. A magic that brings about the destruction of the planet, but it is also its will that this magic exists that prevents it, or at least challenge it. And I think it has a lot to do with exactly what we see depicted in the painting, and as we will see in the rest of the compilation. If the cycle of good and evil is dictated by two groups, one of them of restoration and one of them of destruction, from what we know of previous videos is that Remake clearly indicates to us that Shinra and Cloud's party are framed in this exact way, defying their destiny. But has this conflict of the Cetra's power, this cycle that they've maintained, has it been depicted in the compilation in any way? Yes. I am so excited for this part, guys. This is not even a joke. This part of the video is meant to reframe our understanding of the War of Beasts. We are going to show this off right now in each part of the compilation.
Really? You will? In that case... Huh?
We need to go over some of the core elements of Before Crisis in order to get a clearer image as to how we reach the world-ending events in the story. And as we will find out, all of these world-ending events, each of them mirror each other directly. Keep in mind that we'll be using Before Crisis as a stepping stone to analyze the events of the compilation. I will do my best to put all of this into context as we move forward. In Before Crisis, Elf, the leader of Avalanche, has a materia stuck in her arm, a summon materia. This summon materia is known as Zirconiade. This summon is meant to bring about the world's end through the burning of the world. In order to properly summon Zirconiade, a list of criteria must be met. Have the summon materia. Acquire the 4 support materia. Then, upon summoning Zirconiade, you must then offer it the summon materia, the same one that you used to summon it. If the summoning materia is not given to Zirconiade after his summoning, he will be incomplete, and therefore he will not be unstoppable, rather he will be able to be stopped. If the summon materia is given to Zirconiade, this summon is indestructible. Let's take a look at Elf. Elf is a regular human with amnesia. She has no Mako enhancements and no cellular transplants. But with this one materia inside of her, Zirconiade, the summon materia, gives her an immense amount of power. As an example, this summon materia grants Elf enough strength to rival Sephiroth in battle, which is unheard of outside of either G-type or S-type cells, let alone Soldier. The caveat is that although she is granted this power through the materia, it is actually draining the life force from her body in order to give her this strength. As we have discussed before, certain powerful materia, such as this summon, needs a lot of Mako in order to use it. In this case, because of its incomplete materia, without the use of the support materia, Zirconiade, in order to maintain itself, must drain the life of Elf in order to keep itself alive. What we are going to see time and time again is this part of the discussion. Now, the objective of the antagonist, Fajito, is to use Zirconiade, and you'd think that he is more than capable at the beginning of the story in order to just start gathering the support materia to gather all of the things that he needs. This is not the case. Even with all of this, Fajito cannot begin to gather the support materia in order to accomplish his summon of Zirconiade. Why? Because Elf has not awakened yet. What triggers this awakening? During the confrontation with Avalanche and the Turks, Elf meets her father, whom she does not remember, but having him speak to her triggers her to start regaining memories. These memories are what trigger her awakening. Again, this is going to come up again as we see several times in the compilation. We'll get back to that. Now, remember that I brought up the fact that within summon materia, there is a person or a creature? Well, this is shown to us in Before Crisis. During a mission in Before Crisis, Avalanche has taken Aerith to her church to speak directly with Elf and her right hand, Fajito, who, again, is the main antagonist of the game. During their conversation, Aerith hears a voice coming from Elf, a voice that is not her own, an old voice. Aerith only can tell us that this old voice, is in pain. Elf, unaware of exactly what the materia inside of her is just confused by Aerith's statement. Fajito, well aware that the summon is inside of Elf, tries to shoo away the attention that Aerith is making towards the summon, that she is just hearing the voices of the planet. Before this can be elaborated on any further, the scene is interrupted. This idea harkens back to the previous cut content of Final Fantasy VII, that Zirconiade was once a person who was bathed in the light of Mako, and that their life energy was sealed into the materia. This is absolutely nuts, because again, Zirconiade does not represent the side of good. Rather, the function of this materia is to bring about the world's end. This is just reinforcing everything that we just talked about. The summon, however, is not complete. In order to properly summon Zirconiade, the 4 support materia must be gathered by the summoner in order to construct it, the support materia. These 4 materia really don't seem all that special when you first come across them, but in fact, they are very necessary to know about, because I believe that these are huge materia being used to summon Zirconiade. During the last part of the game, Fajito gathers the 4 support materia and Elf. With the summon materia still inside of Elf, begins the summoning of Zirconiade. The 4 support materia shoot outwards. The colors that distinguish the 4 support materia are red, blue, green, and yellow. These support materia match the color of every huge materia in the original Final Fantasy VII. And one of the things that will support this is one of the materia that you collect actually is found in the same reactor that you find another huge materia in Final Fantasy VII in the Corel Mako reactor. Just to clarify that by taking the huge materia from this spot in the reactor, this would not be the same one that is found later by the party in Final Fantasy VII. More likely that in the time that this huge materia was removed from the core of the reactor, another one was created between Before Crisis and Final Fantasy VII. This just means that this reactor that is making this Mako, that is making this huge support materia, is swarming with Mako, able to produce more than one of these materia. Now we're going to talk about the antagonist of Before Crisis, Fajito. This character is the number 2 of Elf. He is actually the pupil of Bugenhagen. Yes, the Bugenhagen from Cosmo Canyon, which is also where Avalanche originated, is Fajito's teacher, meaning that Fajito is very educated on the planet. Somewhere in Fajito's studies, he becomes dedicated to the planet. He is so serious about making sure that the planet is being preserved is that he thinks that what would be an awesome idea is to eliminate all life from the planet so it all can return to the life stream. So much so that he disregards human life and sees every life that is taken as a benefit to the planet. By the way, we're going to see this pattern with a lot of the villains knowing a lot about the knowledge of the planet, deriving from that knowledge that the only course of action that will save the planet is to kill all life on the planet. We're going to be seeing that a lot. Once Elf is awakened, Fajito summons Zirconiade. Using the 4 support materia, Zirconiade is born in his first stage, an incomplete stage. Zirconiade is just waiting for the summon materia. Fajito attempts to get to Zirconiade before the Turks stop him. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. 1. Zirconiade materializes in a very strange place that we know of from both Final Fantasy VII and Remake. Zirconiade materializes at the end of the road in Midgar, the same place that we fight the Harbinger in Remake. The other thing is that once Zirconiade is summoned, a pathway for the Turks is materialized in order to gain access to Zirconiade. This road, this area in general, is exactly the same as the one that we find at the ending of Final Fantasy VII at the point of no return, in which you climb into the core of the planet and fight Genova. These parallels don't seem very coincidental. Anyway, this gives Fajito, the Turks, the way inside, but we're going to talk about the nature of this path when we talk about Final Fantasy VII. So, during the end part of Before Crisis, once the Turks have caught up to Fajito with the summon materia in hand, Fajito sees no other choice than to merge with the materia in order to fend off the Turks. Upon joining with the summon materia, Fajito is flooded with the knowledge of the Cetra. He exclaims that he finally understands, and that it was his destiny to do what he is doing right now. Now, Fajito doesn't explain to us that he sees his victory, nor does he specify his defeat. All we know is that the knowledge he has gained allows him to see his own purpose in the events transpiring. After reiterating Zirconiade's purpose, he exclaims that the 2 opposing him, a member of Avalanche and the Turk, are traitors to the planet. Fajito is destroyed and the summon materia breaks, allowing the Turks to beat Zirconiade. Note that at this point, Zirconiade has no way of completing itself. Zirconiade is incomplete, and that too will be a reoccurring element as we move forward. Now, the way to fully destroy Zirconiade is by destroying the 4 power sources of Zirconiade. This introduces that the support materia are in reality huge materia, and shows us how exactly Zirconiade is able to keep his form even after being summoned. While Zirconiade is incomplete, it is still gathering power from these 4 sources of energy. This just reiterates how much power materia like Zirconiade needs in order to maintain itself. Now, something that is very interesting happens when you go to destroy these sources of energy, these support materia, these huge materia individually. They are all guarded by shadows, black figures that surround the source of energy. These creatures do not have names and do not have any further elaboration in Before Crisis, but we're going to see this pattern as well in future titles. After being knocked down by Zirconiade, after the defeat of all of its support materia, the Turk you play unleashes her own limit break. This, too, is caused by the memories of those you have met throughout the game. This gives the Turk the power to destroy Zirconiade. Upon destroying Zirconiade, it explodes into light, most likely caused by the sudden explosion or release of Mako that has gathered in Zirconiade. Now, from what we know of this event is that upon the activation of the summoned Zirconiade, Jade Weapon is also activated. And this is important to illustrate because, as we have talked about, the summon itself, again, when the world is threatened by something that represents the destruction of the planet uses something of its own to protect itself. But from what we have discussed previously, one of these is just a summon. Zirconiade, a being that was imprisoned inside of a materia, using the power of the Cetra, and its purpose is to bring about the destruction of the planet, and that the planet's response to this is to destroy it with a weapon, a being that is already associated with the will of the planet, a being that is also associated with the Cetra Minerva. This begins to show us that the mural in Remake is starting to give us a level of detail of events that have already been introduced to us. And to remind you, as I have already mentioned, that messing with the balance causes Jade Weapon to target the Turks specifically. This is just because the balance of the weapon's purpose was disrupted. So what are we starting to learn here? Is that the conflict between good and evil is all indicated by creations of Cetra, and that the difference between it is only the generation of Cetra that we are dealing with. And as we will learn from Before Crisis, is that these events repeat themselves in the same steps as one another throughout the compilation. So as I mentioned before, when Zirconiade is destroyed, what do we see? Its body fades, but then something happens. From the air, bits of Mako begin to form in the air and drift down. This single event transpires in Before Crisis, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, and as we know, Remake. And we're gonna get down to what exactly this is later in the video, but now...
My friend, your desire is the bringer of life, the gift of the goddess. Legend shall speak of sacrifice at world's end.
Crisis Core. Now, there is a huge amount of this that gets very convoluted, especially when you start introducing other parts of the compilation, but for the sake of discussion, I'm going to try my best to just stick to the story beats here that are important. In Crisis Core, Genesis, a G-type soldier, is degrading. Hollander, a scientist that started Project G, which created Genesis, is convinced that he can help stop Genesis's degrading. They make a base in Benora Underground to construct an army for Genesis using his copy ability, while Hollander also continues research to prevent Genesis's degradation. Genesis at some point realizes that Hollander is doing as all scientists do in Final Fantasy VII's universe, is getting carried away with his own selfish desires in research, and that Hollander uses the copy technology on himself and begins to degrade himself. In his case, faster than others. All of that being said, this forces Hollander to try and find a solution to the degradation, just as Genesis has been trying to find one. Now at this point, the Benora Underground is the base of operations for Genesis, his army, and for Hollander's research. In the Benora Underground, there is a location known as the Cage of Binding. In the Cage of Binding, you can find a laboratory key that allows you access to a lab. Note that this seems to be the only place in Benora Underground that depicts the containment used to house Genesis copies, meaning that this was most likely Hollander's lab in Benora. Also, there isn't another depiction of a laboratory in this area. This is the only depiction of one. Now, something peculiar happens only in this area, in this laboratory, in the Benora Underground. You fight for huge materia. This materia never shows up again throughout the game. It's only in this lab, and they never appear again. This is hinting at the fact that these materias are here for a reason. And Hollander could have thought that these materia would come into play somehow to fixing his own degradation, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to note as to why that might be. Hollander never shows any interest in the planet, but at this point in the story, Genesis has his hold over Hollander due to his degradation. From thereafter, Genesis would use the underground cave as his base, and under his command, it would be remodeled to have additions built to it, at last reaching its current design. This means that the huge materia found here in the Cage of Binding, in the base of Genesis, that the huge materia found here was most likely instructed to be used by Hollander in order to find a cure for the degradation. We know that inside of the room, there were 5 reported experiments that broke out of these containment units. These creatures are what show up in the Benora Underground before arriving at the Cage of Binding. All of them are very similar to machinoids. The only different thing here is that they seem to portray the degradation that we find in other copies. We can further elaborate that instead of just being random test subjects without being Genesis copies, that they all have their names associated with G, which is a direct parallel to Genesis. All of these experiments are named after different layers of hell. This is going to come back when we start talking about Dirge of Cerberus. My theory is that Hollander was experimenting in using this huge materia in order to stop the degradation of Genesis reluctantly. I think it is more so that Genesis is telling him, Hollander, to study them. But remember that because of the power of Mako, it can transform things into monsters. In this instance, with these machinoids, we are dealing with humans that cannot withstand the process of the Mako integration. Now, what happens to Genesis after Hollander's death? Genesis's objective was to cure the deterioration. He looked for the way, and as mentioned, he took various actions towards that goal. However, as he was unable to take Cloud's cells, and with the death of Hollander, he lost his way to stop his deterioration. So, as his final recourse, he turned to the lifestream. As we know, Genesis also turns to the pages of Loveless, something that he equates to being connected to the materia in Benora. Now let us describe how this event goes down. In order for Zack to enter the area where he faces Genesis in the Benora Underground, he has to open a door sealed by some sort of locking mechanism that is depicted as being connected to the Cetra. In order to open it, Zack must locate 7 materia to unlock it. The 7 materia are known as the light materia, heaven materia, ground materia, star materia, life materia, being materia, and Sabbath materia. This should be signaling to you something similar, as in order to gain access to the Temple of the Ancients in Final Fantasy VII, to get to the black materia, you must also access it with a materia. These 7 materia are all used on this pedestal. There is a glow, and the door to the Light of Doom, the last area where you face Genesis, opens. Alright guys, this is where the serious shit comes in. I mentioned that FFVIII, after his study of the planet, becomes convinced that the death of all life was the necessary action in order to preserve the planet. I am going to make the same connection to Genesis, but in order to do so, I need to talk about some information that we have not seen yet. One of the things I have always been convinced of from the very beginning of this series of videos is that Lovelace was linked to the Cetra, and because of it holds the knowledge of the Cetra that depicts the cycle of events. We are going to strengthen that connection right now, as Genesis's dialogue in the Japanese release reveals some mind-blowing connections to Remake, and by doing so, the rest of the compilation. The Duel of Beasts. Rather than a war, a duel of two is what makes up the War of Beasts. Genesis makes this clear to Zack that it is their confrontation that is creating this duel. This clears up something very important that we needed to know about exactly what Genesis's plan is up until this point. Not until this point, we have been told by the game that, and very improperly communicated to us, that all Genesis has wanted to do is he wants to stop his degradation. In the English version, that's all that is clear, but that isn't all Genesis is trying to do. Genesis is trying to reenact the Duel of Beasts in order to bring about the world's end, and that with that, the goddess will appear. Genesis states in the Japanese version that the goddess will lead us to our paradise along with her gift. The gift that Genesis states is the summoning materia on the tree in the Benora Underground, confirming this by saying that this is the gift of the goddess, is a gift born from nature. This line alone creates a direct connection between Genesis's interpretation of Lovelace and the Cetra proverb in Remake. In Remake, the Cetra proverb states, "By her loving grace and providence, may we take our place in paradise." Now, we are going to confirm right now that these two texts are both Cetra made. With this line, the materia activates. Genesis informs Zack that this materia is the gift. As we know, this gift is meant to lead to paradise. The moment right before Genesis absorbs the power of the materia, he exclaims, "Everyone, let us all return to the planet. Of course, you as well. Now I shall receive the providence of the planet." Okay. What the fuck? Genesis, while reenacting Lovelace being graced with the providence of the planet, uses the gift in order to lead us to paradise. Genesis is planning to return everything to the life stream with the power bestowed on him by the summoning materia. This is all a direct parallel to the events of before Crisis. A summon materia is used and is being used to kill all life on the planet. This is in order to return everyone to the life stream. And that's not all. Just like FFVIII, Genesis gains the knowledge of the planet by doing this. After Genesis's defeat, Genesis quotes Lovelace again, which indicates to Zack that Genesis knows that this is what the outcome of his destiny was. That this was the outcome of his destiny. "Thy revenge has scarred my soul, agonizing for its end. My wish becomes my relief and your peaceful slumber." To this, Zack says this: "Don't tell me that from the very beginning you were." Genesis smirks, and this is never elaborated on. Let's break this down, because I believe by looking at exactly what FFVIII says in Before Crisis, we can explain exactly what just happened here. FFVIII is not aware of the planet's plan for him. It is only after receiving the materia that FFVIII begins to understand that this was his destiny. Just like FFVII, Genesis, in the moment of absorbing the knowledge of the summoning materia, understands that this was his destiny. That is just stupid how crazy that is. I will be breaking down the other part of that quote later, as there are many differences in this version of Lovelace's reenactment that takes place in the Japanese version of Crisis Core, and that gives us a much more specific clue as to what exactly happens. Now, I need to bring up exactly what happens to Genesis after he fights Zack. Now, at the start of this video, I equated soldiers that are ancient beings who, when their life force is sealed into materia, become summons, and that by doing so, you gained the ability to live for far longer than you were supposed to. Now, Genesis, having recognized that his role at the end of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core is that of the three friends dynamic presented in Lovelace, is that he is not the hero but the slave, as we talked about in part 1, has lost his soldier honor. In order to regain that title, Genesis must fight Zack. Upon his defeat, yet again, Genesis appears in front of the statue of Minerva in what seems to be the life stream. What exactly happens here? In interviews with the development staff, this is what happens. Minerva's facial expressions are meant to be hints to the life stream's judgment, such as Genesis has not yet completed his duty as soldier, and Genesis still has much left to learn. Genesis wanted to regain his pride as a soldier, deciding that it could not be found simply in the duty of the soldier. He came to the idea that I am not afraid of degradation or death. Genesis's circumstances are that of surmounting death. Genesis's strong desire to complete the duty of a soldier was accepted by the life stream in a way of saying to him, then complete it. Thus, because of that decision, Genesis was able to achieve his goal of surmounting death, and this event is connected to Genesis's further actions. From this information alone, Minerva was ordered by the will of the planet, just made Genesis a soldier, a being similar to that of beings inside of summons, a summon of the planet itself, a weapon. And by doing this, Genesis was able to surmount his death, meaning that he, like the other summons, has gained that same power. And that's not all. By being defeated by Zack, Genesis is able to regain the pride he had as a soldier, and with Sephiroth and Angeal now dead, he decided that it is up to him, who has been left behind, to protect the world. And so, in order to prepare for the day when a crisis threatens the world, Genesis seals himself in the flooded chamber on his own volition. This is the true meaning of Genesis's version of the phrase from the final chapter of Lovelace, and that at the same time, the true meaning of the secret movie in Dirge of Cerberus. Genesis was considered a unique soldier who sealed himself away to protect the planet. Genesis is not an enemy of the planet. He is the protector of it, and the planet is his guardian, guided by its providence, the plan of the planet, which led him to Minerva, who then decided that he would be given a gift, a fate that transformed Genesis to become the protector of the planet, and in exchange, the planet would become his guardian. Genesis sealed himself away inside of the cave beneath Midgar, only to be triggered by a crisis. So, at this point, you should start seeing a pattern here, that before Crisis and Crisis Core are being depicted as a recurring event, and that FFVII a student of the planet, and Genesis, a soldier of Shinra, led by the knowledge of Loveless, or the Cetra texts, both use the power of a summon in order to grant them knowledge of their destiny, and that this knowledge led them to their eventual fates, dictated by the will of the planet. I did not mention this before, but Fajito, after having a conversation with Bugenhagen, stated that even though Fajito was looking to enact his plans for summoning the end of the world, felt that, regardless of what Fajito did, Bugenhagen felt he would fail, and that it was the will of the planet that he would, which ends up becoming true. Both Fajito's fate and Genesis's fate had already been decided by the planet. After Genesis left Benora by Zack after their confrontation, 2 Deep Ground soldiers are tasked with bringing Genesis to Deep Ground. We will come to know these soldiers as characters in Dirge of Cerberus, Vice and Nero. These 2 are arguably the main antagonists of Dirge of Cerberus, and the catalyst for the world's end in Dirge of Cerberus. So what we learned is that before Crisis and Crisis Core, that these 2 summons, both Zirconiade and Genesis, were used to bring about the world's end. 2 beings created by the planet, and that Genesis, a newly born soldier, a weapon given this life of a summon by the planet's will, is now a function of the planet, and that while these events may have been thwarted, Genesis has not yet completed his duty to the planet, and that this awakening signifies a greater crisis, one beyond that of Dirge. We learned about materia, huge materia, and the summons, and how all of this has been reflecting off of Shinra's actions the entire time. We learned that the confrontation between good and evil may very well be between 2 different factions of Cetra. But what of Dirge, and what of Final Fantasy VII when it comes to this depiction of this cycle? And what about Remake? Will I ever finish the deconstruction of Loveless? All of that and more in future parts of this series. Now I know that we didn't get to Dirge of Cerberus and we didn't get to the original Final Fantasy VII, but we are going to be doing that at the beginning part of the next video. I'd just like to give another shout out to Obsidian for once again being an extremely large help to just several different subjects of Final Fantasy VII, and just again being an amazing bounce. I can't thank Obsidian enough. And I would also like to give a shout out to everyone in the live stream. It is because of all of the hard work that you guys have done that has allowed me to continue to make these videos and be able to be a continued source of information for these videos as far as Ultimania stuff and the rest of the compilation is concerned. Thank you once again for everybody who sat down and listened to the entire video, let alone the series. It's crazy to think that you guys have stayed with this for so long, and I am more than happy to keep making these videos into the future for you guys. That being said, I will be getting to your guys' comments, and I will be trying to catch up on that after this video goes up, and getting to all of the ones that you guys are probably going to be making on this new video. Around this time, I also think that we're about to hit 2,000 subs. That is absolutely crazy to me. Again, only having like 4 videos and having that already happening is pretty nuts to me. And it's all thanks to you guys that that's possible. And I am excited to bring you guys more parts of the series. I will also most likely be streaming a Final Fantasy VII game sometime soon, and I will be probably doing that on Twitch or YouTube or both. I don't know how any of that works yet, but I thought it would be fun to do that. So if you're interested in maybe talking and watching me play through the game while developing some more insights, just stay tuned for that. And I will be getting to the next part of this video very soon. I guess we will be just waiting to get to all of the stuff that we've been building up to in